It's good to join you today as we continue in our Easter season, and the end is kind of in sight, right? Pentecost is getting closer, and before that, of course, the Ascension is coming up. And, so we continue in this great time of the church. And if you're anything like me, you have heard these readings from Acts of the Apostles, and when maybe as years have gone by, just kind of glazed over what was happening. You just thought like, okay, what's happening here? Why is all this particularly important? And so there is a lot happening, and the style in which it was written almost hides in a way the impact of the events that are being narrated. So again, we know this is the expansion, this is the maturation of the Christian church. And we see that we see here we get dropped into the story that Paul and Barnabas have been preaching and sharing the gospel. And the very first words of the reading today are some Jews from Antioch and Iconium arrived and went over. In other words, they counter-preached to what Paul and Barnabas were saying. And so the implication is that many people were open to God's grace, and then they were closed off after this kind of counter witness. And so what happens is they punish Paul by stoning, right? And stoning was a cultural practice, a form of punishment, right? It didn't necessarily always lead to death, but it was a form of punishment. And in the law of Moses, as I recall, actually mandated under certain circumstances. And it's a brutal thing, isn't it? I mean, throwing rocks at someone is a truly awful way to hurt them or kill them. It's certainly it can lead to great disfigurement and injury. And so the narrative tells us that he was so affected by this punishment that they thought he was dead. So they thought he had killed him, and then they drug him out of the town, and then he gets back up and dusts himself off. So I don't know how many of you noticed that, but again, all that's in the reading. It's easy to miss. Why do I bring it up? I bring it up because we forget that the intent of the writer here, probably St. Luke, in terms of Acts of the Apostles, this is probably written by St. Luke, is not just to say they went here, they did this, they went to this place. It's to show what Christ was doing in his church. Specifically to show us that against all odds, the church is growing. The church is adding to the number of the elect. Because it is really against all odds. Christianity was a development from Judaism, and that was how it was presented. And in fact, that is really it. So, there was a tremendous establishment resistance. And as you can imagine, many of the leaders in the old guard didn't want to hear something that could change their lives and to recognize the apostles are the ministers, the bishops of this new covenant. And so there was incredible resistance, and there were martyrs right away, right? St. Stephen's martyrdom is one of the well-known ones. But it's a beautiful reading, and so I do want to encourage you to actually consider, even if you go to daily Mass or are listening over the internet, consider actually going back and reading and rereading these narratives in their unbroken format. I would really like to invite you to think about doing that. Consider going back over, and if you do it with a better translation. The Revised Standard Version is a superior translation to the one that we read at Mass. And I would encourage you to consider using a better translation, although this is a valid translation that's approved by the church. So we continue, and so now we read our gospel today, and we continue with this setting that I hope that some of you are tuned in to the setting of this reading. This is the Last Supper, right? This is Jesus' kind of monologue. He goes on for a very, very long time about a few different things. And this is this is during the context of the Last Supper on Maundy Thursday. And so what is Jesus talking about today? Well, he manages to condense a tremendous amount of content into a few brief words. And not only that, but in relating this, John the evangelist does this with a beauty that is really poetic. There is really so much in this reading. And so let's just look at a little bit of it. I don't think we have enough time to look at all of it. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives. One of the great challenges we have is that we expect to experience the kind of peace that is promised by everything else than Christ. You know, we think of peace as not war, as not affliction, as not having a toothache, as not being jobless, as having, being able to spend time with your grandchildren easily, being able to interact with people that you love. He says, I don't give you the world's peace. I give you my version of it. We have to understand that when we follow Christ, we are probably going to have less of the world's peace and more, hopefully, of the peace that is offered by Christ. There is nothing especially Christian about, loving your grandkids, about, watering your plants, about, being a good citizen, things like that. Obviously, we can do those things animated by Christ's love. But the point I'm making here is that there are a ton of people in the world who do all that and they don't follow Christ. And Christ's grace is calling us to be citizens of heaven, to be citizens of heaven, to live in the state of grace, to be sanctified in everything we do, to love our enemies, a lot harder to do. All that kind of stuff. I'm trying to tell you that natural good qualities are not enough for the kingdom of heaven. We have to be citizens of heaven starting now. The peace that Christ gives is the peace that prepares us for our next life. He says that if you loved me, I love this, there's irony here. He's like, if you really loved me, if you got anything of what I shared, he said, you would rejoice that I am doing my Father's will. If we love God, we want his will above every single thing in our lives, even when his will appears to be to our detriment. If we love God, we want him to reign in our lives, even if we have to change to give him room to reign. He says, I will no longer speak much with you, for the ruler of the world is coming. He has no power over me, but the world must know that I love the Father. He has no power over me. I think you get an idea as to who the ruler of the world is. Note that he doesn't say the devil who has no power and influence and is very weak and unimportant. He says, the prince of the world is coming. He says, what is his response to this? He says, the world must know that I love my dad. I love the Father. And I do just as the Father commands me. All we really have to do to follow Christ is to love Jesus, love his Father, and do whatever he commands. And he commands us to live a full life of participation in his mystical body, the church, and to every day try to surrender more and more those things that keep God from reigning completely in our lives, so that we too as Christ has set the example, may love the Father, that we may follow God, completely in everything that we do, and experience that joy that is not of this world, but a joy that is a glimpse into the perpetual light of heaven.